Scene 8. Into the swamp as Tira and her group stepped onto the stage, the purple glow of the portal cast an eerie, shifting light over them. She watched each group ahead vanish into it, the shimmer marking each departure with a final ripple, as if the portal needed time to reset, to adapt. There was a moment of quiet anticipation as they waited to step through. Tira's foot settled on the creaky floorboard beneath her, but as she crossed into the glow, the old wood faded beneath her step, replaced by something soft and wet. Her pupils contracted sharply as the light enveloped her, a flash that left her blinking, and she felt the air thicken with boggy humidity, a stark contrast to the dry, crowded auditorium. The echo of whispers and shuffling seats faded away, replaced by the persistent buzz of insects and the wet weight of humid air. As her vision adjusted, she looked down to see dark, marshy soil swallowing her boots, and she shifted her weight to avoid sinking further, feeling the mud give beneath her feet with a squelching sound. Around her the group stumbled as they, too, adjusted to the swamp's oppressive atmosphere. Liz pulled back, her nose wrinkling in disgust as she glanced down at her mud-streaked shoes. Bannock moved to steady Kelly, who seemed surprised by the unsteady footing. Devon and Val, unfazed, observed their surroundings with quiet focus, their faces set in unreadable expressions. "You're nervous," Max observed with a quiet, dry amusement, sensing her tension. Tira did not respond, but made it clear that she didn't want him to guide her or tell her what to do. This was her test after all, and she wanted to approach it on her own terms. She took a breath, feeling the weight of his presence settle into the background as she focused on the situation at hand. "Would have been nice if they'd told us what we were supposed to be doing," Kenny grumbled, frustration crossing his face as he adjusted to the squelching ground underfoot. "Maybe figuring it out is the whole point," Tommy chimed in, a grin flashing across his face as he gathered materials along the ground, inspecting them closely. He'd already fashioned a simple rope by weaving together some vines, and finding a piece of wood coated in a strangely flammable sap, had begun making a makeshift torch. "Mac, Addy, can you guys help gather more vines?" he called, his enthusiasm for the task evident. "They're probably testing how we handle being left to our own devices," Liz said, her tone confident and dismissive, as if the entire exercise was just a minor inconvenience to her. "Just stay out of the muck," she added with a scowl, nudging a particularly vile-looking puddle with her toe. She barely gave anyone time to respond before striding forward, expecting the others to follow. Tira noticed a clear divide forming within the group. Kenny's gaze shifted back to Bannock, his loyalty unwavering, as he urged Kelly to stand beside him in support of Bannock's suggestion to stay together. Bannock, ever the peacemaker, looked between his friends and Liz's group, as if trying to find a path forward that wouldn't lead to a split. "Notice how easily they fall into their roles," Max murmured, but Tira brushed it aside, focused on the dynamics playing out before her. "So any guesses about what we're meant to do here?" Tira asked Bannock quietly, watching the way he seemed to weigh each person's reaction. "Not really," he admitted with a gentle shrug, a humble honesty that made Tira feel as though he could admit uncertainty without losing confidence. "But I think sticking together might help us figure it out faster." He raised his voice, directing his words to the others. "Listen, if we work together, we'll figure out what we're supposed to be doing. Wandering off might make it harder to find any clues." Liz narrowed her gaze, a smirk forming as she met Bannock's eyes. "Oh sure, let's take orders from you," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look, Bannock, we don't have time to stand around talking. I say we pick a direction, find the edge of this place, and go from there." Kenny spoke up, his voice tense. "Bannock's got the right idea. Maybe if we cooperate instead of racing, we'll get somewhere." "I hope you don't sink," Liz said, her tone cool and dismissive. Tira felt a flash of irritation at Liz's tone, but admired Bannock's calm as he nodded, choosing not to escalate things. Kenny's frustration was visible, but Bannock placed a steadying hand on his friend's shoulder, quietly maintaining the peace. "He's keeping the group together, even if it costs him," Tira thought, admiring his quiet resolve. "All right," Bannock said, his voice even. "We'll follow Liz's lead." He met Tira's eyes with a faint smile, a silent acknowledgement that this wasn't ideal, but he wanted to avoid making things worse. The group began moving cautiously through the swamp, their steps slow and careful as they avoided puddles and clumps of thick moss. Addie and Mac ventured ahead, occasionally stopping to inspect the ground, and soon Addie called out, waving them over. "Whoa, take a look at these," she said, pointing to a set of strange indentations in the mud. Kelly knelt beside her, examining the prints with a discerning eye. "There, humanoid but smaller," she mused aloud. Devon stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "Swamp goblins," he confirmed, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Looks like we've got a lead." Max's voice drifted through Tira's mind, laced with a wry humor. "Goblin tracks, how original." She resisted the urge to smile, focusing instead on the footprints. Nearby, Tommy continued fashioning his torch, wrapping the sap-coated club with a bit of fabric he'd found, and securing it with the rope he'd created. "In case we need some light or to defend ourselves," he said, grinning. Mac and Addie gave him encouraging nods as they continued gathering nearby materials. Just then Tira noticed movement on the far side of the clearing, a figure struggling against the thick mud, his arms raised in a futile attempt to push through it. "Hey," she called to the group, pointing. "There's someone over there." They turned in the direction she indicated, and as they drew closer they saw a middle-aged man in ragged clothes, his expression contorted with fear and worry. He flailed against the swamp, mud reaching up to his chest, dragging him down. Tira's heart leaped, and she realized with a start that he was drowning. Without hesitation, Liz's voice cut through the group's stunned silence. "Val, help him," she barked, her tone sharp and commanding. Val, almost without a second thought, leaped into the muck and cut through the water toward the man. Her tall, athletic frame moved with a lifeguard's efficiency as she reached him, supporting him with calm strength. She barely noticed the mud soaking her clothes, her focus entirely on getting him to solid ground. The others watched in silent awe as Val's competence shone through, dispelling their initial assumptions. As the man caught his breath, his gaze moved across them, his eyes wide and wild. "Please," he gasped, his voice rough and pleading. "My daughter, the goblins. They took her." Liz tilted her head, her expression skeptical, treating him as though he were made of cardboard. "A quest, then," she murmured to herself, glancing at Devon, who seemed just as unimpressed. Tira watched as Devon sighed faintly, a flicker of disappointment on his face. Though she wasn't entirely certain, something in his demeanor suggested he might view the man's plight as too convenient, a distraction from the real test. She caught his eye briefly, her gaze questioning, and he offered only a wry, almost bored smirk in return. Meanwhile, Kelly knelt beside the man, gently checking his arms for injuries. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her voice soothing. Kenny hovered nearby, his expression tense with concern. "Maybe someone should stay with him, just in case he's too weak to get out of here alone," he muttered. Bannock glanced at Tira, a hint of understanding in his eyes as he noticed her wariness. It seemed he shared her quiet suspicion, the same unease she felt about the man's oddly scripted words and his lack of answers to their questions. The situation felt hollow, rehearsed. She offered Bannock a small nod, and he turned to Kenny and Kelly with a gentle nudge. "Don't worry," Bannock said softly to the twins, steering them back toward the group. "I think he'll be all right, but for now, let's stick together." His calm resolve balanced their worry, allowing them to regroup without further distraction. As they prepared to head toward the thicket, Bannock and Tira exchanged glances, each sensing the group's fragile unity. Tira felt a quiet admiration for Bannock's ability to maintain harmony, even when it meant conceding to Liz's unyielding approach. He stood apart from many others she'd met, different, like the verdant deer she'd heard about, who valued balance and understanding over personal gain. Perhaps, she mused, she would be put in the same house as him. Max's voice whispered through her thoughts, a quiet reassurance that they'd find their path through the chaos. "Good job spotting the drowning man," he said, his words filled with warmth. With a renewed sense of purpose, she moved forward, matching Bannock's steady pace as they ventured deeper into the swamp's shadows.